Okay, so we're back, and now I've got a little article analysis form, which was the original title of this critique form that you have. I've got this article analysis form that I wrote up under the name Mary Smith. The writer and the title of the article is Ragsdale John. The Things Presidents Say, the Use of Swords into Plowshares by Republican Presidents from Eisenhower to Bush II. And so this is something I presented at the 45th, as it turns out, annual meeting of the Society for Pentecostal Studies in St. Louis. I happened to live in St. Louis and worked at St. Louis University at the time, so it was pretty convenient. But I presented this paper there in one of the biblical studies sections, and it's an attempt, because the theme of that conference that year was Pentecostalism and culture, and so I've been interested in the way or the ways in which U.S. presidents use the Bible, and that's what got me going here. And several years ago, also at the Society for Pentecostal Studies meeting in Minneapolis, I heard a writer, I heard a presenter talk about the University of California, Santa Barbara's digital library and database on presidential speeches and comments at toasts, and all these public statements by presidents, the American Presidency Project. Well, I thought, well, that sounds interesting, and so it's got a searchable database. I can go in and search biblical metaphors. They don't always talk about the name of the book that they got something from, but kind of key important quotes from the Bible I can search. And so I came up with this, using that resource, I came up with looking at Isaiah chapter 2 verse 4, where Isaiah says that they'll beat their swords into plowshares. And I thought, well, this is a really common statement among U.S. presidents. It's used relatively frequently, but that frequency, it is for the first 150 years of the U.S. Existence. It's relatively infrequent, but then from Eisenhower on, it picks up a lot. Well, of course, that's post World War II. This is just really interesting to me, and so are there guiding themes? Are there things that we can say about presidents' use of that particular term? And here I am, an Old Testament prof, thinking about how presidents use biblical imagery and language. What does that tell us about our, perceived public religion? Anyway, that's my motivation. And so I write, however, this is on page 2 actually. However, I think it was page 2, I'll go back and check here. When one investigates the way in which presidents use religious texts, we find that their use of those texts appears guided, perhaps necessarily, by political considerations rather than by a desire to rightly divide the word of truth. And that rightly divide part is in quotes, because that comes from the scriptures. So that is the thesis, and as you'll see on the form provided, this sample, I simply write there, I believe the author's thesis is this. And then you'll see that I have 3 strengths and 3 weaknesses. For example, I say in this mock form, the writer does a good job of summarizing the available data. Now, this is in bulleted form, it's abbreviated, you certainly could expand on that, but I just wanted to give you an idea of what I was looking for. Article weaknesses. Here's about the thesis statement. This is point C. The thesis statement could have been worded more succinctly, and I struggled with that myself. I knew that was a weakness in my own writing, right? That this particular thesis statement, I thought, I need to hone this. I need to get it a bit more definite and tighter, and I never felt like I did that to the degree I wanted to. So that's my own kind of maybe insecurity coming out about this particular piece. I just think I could have nailed that a little bit better than I did. And so the intended audience, because it tells us that this was for an academic presentation, I note that there. And then I go into the critique of the article, and I say clearly this is the best article ever written on any topic ever. Now, you'd never say that, but it's to make a point to my students. And I've already talked in some of the last videos about how one would use those articles' strengths and weaknesses for the overall critique, and maybe a little bit of your own experience, though not a reflection. So maybe this this particular article analysis form, this sample, could help guide you as you think about the kinds of things I'm looking for in your critique of articles. And you've got my article there if you had some time and wanted to read it, and then you could also say, well, this this sample critique here is valid. It's not valid. It would just, reading the two together might help bring this little help together a little bit better for you. All right, so there we go. Now we're going to come back in the next video and start talking about this week's article in particular.